Welcome to Codex History of Video Games. My name's Tyler Osby.
And I'm Mike Coletta.
And this week, we're going to talk about a forgotten game, although I don't know how forgotten it is. We're going to talk about Perfect Dark today.
Yeah, it's forgotten in the sense that we talked about it last week, and we're like, remember that game? We should talk about it. So that's
we forgot
what we're doing.
It briefly.
Very briefly. I love this game. The first one is near and dear to my heart.
It's a great game.
It really is. And so we're going to start with Perfect Dark N64. Also just Perfect Dark. There's no abbreviation to it, but I'm just putting N64 on there to keep it clear. And that means we're starting with Grime Facts, which I feel like we haven't done in so long.
We haven't done Grime Facts in a long time.
So here we go. Developer and publisher, Rare. Release date, North America on the 22nd of May, 2000, and then in Europe on June 30th, 2000. And that is the N64 release date. The Xbox 360 remake by 4J Studios came out on March 17th, 2010 for Xbox 360. Systems it was on was N64 originally, and then the Xbox 360 re-release I just mentioned. Number of copies sold. So, in a Eurogamer interview in 2011, a former Rare dev, Chris Tilston, said the original Perfect Dark sold 3.2 million copies, which is a lot.
Yeah.
And I think that becoming a player's choice game in December 2000 helped, but there's no like definitive evidence to say that helped or not. But we're just going to say that's probably what helped too, because it dropped to $40.
Yep.
The genre or gameplay style was first-person shooter. The average time to complete, according to HowLongToBeat.com, is the main story 8.5 hours, main plus extra 17, completion is 31. I've dropped, as a child, so many hours into this video game.
How many would you estimate?
Hundreds.
Hundreds of hours. Wow.
Because me and my friends would just play multiplayer all night. Just constant Mountain Dews, Hot Pockets, pizza rolls, and Perfect Dark multiplayer.
Wow.
Just living our best lives. So the Metacritic score for this game is a 97 out of 100 for the N64 version, a 79 out of 100 for the Xbox 360 version. My guess with the Xbox 360 version is that some of those like older gameplay choices of the early 2000s were not shown in a very good light on the 360 just because we're in modern gaming in 2010. So it's like, feels weird.
Yeah.
Gameplay wise, this is a first-person shooter very similar to GoldenEye. In fact, it ran on almost the exact same engine as GoldenEye. You can hold an unlimited amount of weapons. You have a health bar that decreases when taking hits. Interestingly enough, there are no health items in the game to get your health back. You can only put shields on yourself to make yourself have shields. Yeah.
I guess I never knew that.
I never knew that either. I was playing it, though, earlier, just like weekend, and I was like, oh, yeah, totally. That's how it works. There's no health items. Just shields. Big thing about Perfect Dark, though, with the gameplay is every weapon has a secondary fire function. My two personal favorites. Okay, we're going to go through my personal favorites. The laptop gun, which creates a super cheap turret that just kills enemies for you. It is absolute baloney in multiplayer. You just turn on like 8 meat sims, is what they were called, the lowest level bots, and you would throw a laptop gun turret on the ground and just watch your kill counter go up. Watch that KD go super high. The other is called the Far Sight. And what's funny is I didn't confirm that it was called the Far Sight. I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Do you want to confirm that for me, that that's the name of the actual gun in Perfect Dark? I'm going off of memory here when I wrote this. Which is an alien sniper rifle that can see through walls. Which was really cool. It is indeed called
the Far Sight. The XR20. Far Sight XR20.
Right off the dome was what happened when I wrote that down. I feel impressed with myself.
Nice.
So, yeah, that's the alien sniper rifle that can see through walls. It's really fun in single player. It's like you can sneak on guys, and it's like a silenced sniper rifle too, so it's even more cheesy. Feels good. Those are my two favorites. Other ones include like the AK-47, which I think was called the K-47 Soviet or something.
Mm-hmm.
That gun could like detect explosives on the ground. And then I think for the Falcon, which is just the pistol you start with at the beginning of the game, the alternate fire mode for that was just to pistol whip people with it, which is fun. But yeah, it's super fun. The game has you unlocking levels linearly, but there is a hub called the Carrington Institute where you can run around between missions. There's a shooting range there. There's some secrets to find there. There's 9 missions but those missions are broken up into parts. So there's 17 parts total. Each mission has 3 difficulty modes. That's Agent, Special Agent, and Perfect Agent. Multiplayer is where things get cool in Perfect Dark, in my opinion. In the combat simulator, which is just kind of like the multiplayer deathmatchy King of the Hill mode, they had bots, which means you could play combat simulator alone, which I'm not going to lie. It's going to make me sound sad. As a child, I played a lot of Perfect Dark solo multiplayer, just playing around with the game modes and like different guns and different objectives, and it's really cool.
That's not sad. What are you supposed to do when nobody's over and you can't go online? Like, what are you supposed to do? That's exactly what that's for. That's not sad. I used to play Unreal Tournament by myself all the time with bots.
You know, you and I played Unreal Tournament together with bots, and that was super fun. Yeah. But we'll talk about that later. So that's the cool part about the combat simulator. There also was just crazy customization. Like, every bot had personalities and custom settings, not just like a standard difficulty. Like, there was meat sim and like normal sim, but they also had like personalities you can customize too. Like, there was one called like Avenge bot that would, like, if you killed it, it would relentlessly try to hunt you down specifically, like a player that was briefed or like inting. It's like that. Especially, it was really cool. Gameplay modes, super customizable, but as far as game modes, there was King of the Hill, Combat, which is just like deathmatch, Hold the Briefcase, which you pick up a briefcase and try to hold on to it before dying, Hacker Central, where you like get points by hacking these like data nodes throughout the map, Pop a Cap, which I don't really remember what Pop a Cap was. If someone remembers, email the show. I realized that I wrote that down as like on the list, and I actually just pulled this straight from the game. Like, I had the game menu open and I was writing these down, and I didn't play Pop a Cap. I should have played it, but whatever. Capture the Briefcase.
Pop a Cap, not Pop a Cap, like Father Cap.
Yeah, Pop a Cap was the game mode. And Capture the Briefcase, which was essentially Capture the Flag. They just used briefcases instead of flags. You can customize the weapons. You can customize your team settings. You can have uneven teams. So it was always me and my friends and then like 12 bots usually.
Oh, yeah. That's so fun. So Pop a Cap mode, this is from the Perfect Dark Wiki, involves one player or simulant being selected at random as the victim. For the victim to score points, they must remain alive for as long as possible. Everyone else must kill the victim to score extra points.
Oh, so it's like VIP mode or whatever in some games.
Yeah, it's like the opposite of VIP mode, right? Because in the VIP mode, like, protect the...
Oh, yeah. The VIP is the one, in this case, that's getting killed. It's a free-for-all mode, too. Some of these are free-for-all, and some of them are team.
Yeah.
I know that. But, like, hold the briefcase is free-for-all. Capture the case is team mode. The cool thing about Perfect Dark, though, is it had a co-op campaign where you played as Velvet Dark, who may or may not be Joanna's sister. We'll talk about that later. But you could also play a counter-operative campaign. Did you ever try this, Tyler?
No, but I have heard about it. I really haven't spent that much time playing the original Perfect Dark, so I'm interested in hearing more about this.
If we play this game, we should definitely play counter-operative. Counter-operative is one player is Joanna Dark playing the campaign, and the other player can jump into the bodies of whatever NPC is in front of Joanna Dark, and you get whatever gun they have, and you get like a cyanide pill. So you could like kill yourself so you could change characters real quick if you want to switch to a different NPC. And your goal is to kill Joanna Dark and make it so she can't complete the level. That's your job.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it's a really cool idea. So that was like a really neat new mode they had. I also love that you just pull whatever gun they have. So they might just have a pistol, but they might have like a rocket launcher. You don't even know. It's really cool. So that's the multiplayer mode and the gameplay. The plot is set in the very, very, very far future, Tyler. It's set in 2023.
Oh, man.
So really far ahead.
Might as well be fantasy.
That's right. There's 2 alien races that are secretly vying for control of the Earth. The Mayans, who look a lot like your standard issue gray Area 51 alien. Like if you're ever in the state of New Mexico and you go to a tourist trap, it's that kind of alien.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Skeedar. I always said Skeedar as a kid. Skedar, who are like reptile aliens, like lizard people, essentially. And they do not look like humanoid at all. So they use these cloaking devices to make themselves look like humans.
So they're the lizard people that control everything, is what you're
exactly. Saying. It's actually... We're going to get into that, but there's a lot of stuff taken from like them mashing every conspiracy theory they could into this video game to make it, and that's a big part of it. You play as Joanna Dark, who is an agent at the Carrington Institute who works with the Mayans. So the Carrington Institute are working with the Mayan aliens. You don't really know that in the beginning, but Joanna Dark is their perfect dark is her code name because she scored a perfect score on like the Carrington Institute training test. And the Carrington Institute is run by a guy named Carrington, who's like a very much a Sean Connery knockoff, but it's fun. So during the game, you rescue an AI who is pretty much just a floating laptop, which is funny. You rescue a Mayan soldier named Elvis. So it's an alien named Elvis who loves American culture and he wears an American flag vest and blue suede shoes. And he talks like a high-pitched Yoda, which is really cool. And I'm leaving a lot out here, but like the president's involved, there's space travel involved, alien spaceships. It's kind of like your quintessential ridiculous video game story, but they do a good job at making like fun moments in this game that work. Did you play the solo player on this at all?
No, I mean, I've played like maybe a few levels of it, but I really haven't spent very much time with it.
What's crazy is it's good. Like, I use the term good to say like it is functional as a story, and sure it gets out there, but no more than any other video game does. And I think it's really fun. So I don't want to say more than that because I feel like it's actually worth playing now. If you haven't played it, I think it's worth it.
Okay.
Especially since there's a 360 version that's not that bad. So history, let's get into it. So I just want to point out that most of this history is coming from three sources. A Eurogamer article from 2011 that's called X Rare Devs Talk Killer Instinct Perfect Dark. That's the first article we're using. And then Rare itself actually has 2 YouTube videos that are mini documentaries that Rare made called Rare Revealed. And the first one is Rare Revealed, The Making of Perfect Dark. And then Rare Revealed 5 Things You Didn't Know About Perfect Dark. So that's where I pretty much got all this information from. Highly recommend you watch those videos. Super cool stuff. And it's cool that Rare makes stuff like that. And they have it for other games as well. So if we ever do like a full... Well, you did a full-on Rare history. They did the first 2
I don't think I looked at those videos, so...
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot of YouTube videos from Rare, which is really cool. So I highly recommend you go look at that. But let's get into the history here of the first Perfect Dark. So Rare had just finished making GoldenEye on the N64. Huge success. We all know that game started like console first-person shooters, right?
Oh, yeah. But hugely influential in console first-person shooters. Absolutely.
Yeah, and starting their work now, they're clearly like, well, we're going to work on the Bond sequel for the next movie, Tomorrow Never Dies. And so they get started working on that. And from what I gather in the documentary, the team was like fine with it. They're like, yeah, we're going to do this. There were just some small issues with new gameplay features they wanted to put into their game that don't fit in the Bond universe, right? And this is what they're kind of noticing as they're developing this new Bond game. So the 3 examples that were brought up by the design support person at Rare, Ken Lobb, was the secondary fire function on guns. That was the main one. They wanted to have a female protagonist, which obviously wouldn't happen if they did a Bond game. And they wanted to make a story about aliens, which while Bond went to the moon, they don't ever talk about aliens in James Bond.
No aliens in James Bond.
So then kind of this bittersweet thing happens. Rare is actually outbid by EA, and they don't have to make Tomorrow Never Dies.
Oh, yeah. That was that game ended up being made for the PlayStation. Did it get an N64 game? I think it did.
I think it did too, yeah. But then this is important, though, because now the team can work on their own IP. They can do their own thing with exactly these 3 things. Secondary functions of guns, female protagonist, story about aliens. So before the name Perfect Dark, they were known as the Alien Intelligence Team, since all they knew was they wanted to make a game about aliens. That's what it was like coded. And then the working title for the game changed a bunch, but at one point it was Covert Operations. And then in order to get the name Perfect Dark, they actually made a computer program that took like all the words they thought would be cool in the title, like alien and destiny and perfect and dark, and they threw a bunch of them in this random generator that would mix them all up, and they landed on Perfect Dark. That's how they figured it out. So there were so many influences to Perfect Dark, namely Blade Runner, Ghost in the Shell, the comic, Elektra, and the X-Files, because they love this idea of government conspiracy and a secret alien invasion, which is why you have the Mayan alien race looking like the gray aliens from X-Files. And then you have this whole lizard people conspiracy theory that they make into the other alien race. And at one point during the plot of the game, the Skeetar are trying to take over kidnap the president so they can put their own person in there to pretend to be the president. It's very conspiracy theory. Here's a fun fact that I didn't know. The name Joanna Dark is a direct play on Joan of Arc, or Jeanne d'Arc, which was the name in French.
Ah.
And the costume for Joanna Dark is very much influenced by Ghost in the Shell. And there's actually some fun costume reference stuff going on in the game. Like Killer Instinct was just made by Rare. And Perfect Dark, fun little fact about it, the dragon dress Joanna Dark wears is straight from Killer Instinct. Like that dragon design is just straight from the game. So they were kind of just doing a nod to their own games there, which I thought was pretty cool. I love when
game companies do that. And Rare does it a lot, just nodding to their other games from all of their games.
Oh, yeah, I think it's fantastic. But to me, the coolest part of Joanna Dark is her voice actor, because her voice actor is actually just a composer that worked at Rare named Eveline Novakovic. And Novakovic also plays Pipsy in Banjo-Kazooie. And then Cassandra, the evil character working for the alien race, the Skeetar, was voiced by another in-house Rare employee, B. Jones, who was an artist. Elvis's voice is Rare game designer Steve Malpass doing a high-pitched Yoda impression, as he describes it. Malpass also voices Grimshaw, who's this really annoying Carrington Institute scientist that's in the hub area. If you get to talk to him, sorry, but it's great. It's really annoying. The big issue that took place, though, during the development of Perfect Dark was half the team left Rare to form Free Radical, a new independent game studio. And this resulted in all of the ideas being planned out before they left, but them having no team to actually develop these new ideas after they left. So they had to completely hire a whole new team. And the Perfect Dark team was 3 times the size of the GoldenEye team. And the cool thing about development is it was super independent. They didn't have any deadlines or any milestones. They were just left to develop this great game, just make a good game. And so that's where all these innovative ideas come from. There was this real, the game will be ready when it's ready mentality, which I feel like we've talked about with Valve, and that helps them make good games, is it's good. It's ready when it's good, and we are happy with it. That's exactly what Perfect Dark was. That's
a good strategy if you can make it work. I don't think that is a very, in general, I don't think that's a good strategy. Because, then you also end up with things like Duke Nukem Forever that are just it's ready when it's ready. And that, games that don't have, deadlines or milestones or things in general, what I've, noticed in doing projects is, if you don't set deadlines, then things just, you get scope creep forever. It's generally not good practice to do it that way. I'm glad it worked for them. It's sort of when you win the lottery and you're like, oh, it worked for me. You're like, okay, that's great that it worked for you. It's not really an actual investment strategy, right?
100%. And the best part is, and during that Eurogamer interview, they talk about that, when we were making this game, our studio was 25 people. And now they have 500 people and all these managers. And I'm like, yeah, this definitely feels like people being back in my day of game development.
It's games are harder to make now. And when you have a lot of people, you need a lot of managers to manage those people. Otherwise, I think if you're going to have a game, if you're going to do something where you don't have deadlines or milestones, the team has to be pretty small. Because you need to make sure that everybody is sort of on the same page vision-wise. And as the team gets bigger, you get more people who may not be, not because they're bad at their jobs, but just because they're just different people, right? And the more people you get, the more likely you are to go off in other directions. So then you need somebody to steer in the right direction.
100%. Yeah, I think it worked, like you said. A shot in the dark in this case was great. Beautiful mirror. I know, fun little pun I accidentally just did. A real miracle thing going on, but not always the case for a lot of games. So there was a really cool thing about the motion capture deaths in this game. The artist B. Jones, because again, everyone's kind of working on everything and helping with everything, had designer Duncan Botwood be in the mocap suit, and they would just poke him with a stick in the shoulder to get if he's getting shot in the shoulder. And they actually mentioned, they're like, yeah, I'd always count to 3, but I'd always hit him on 1, so he wasn't expecting it. Also, they had like a rope tied around his waist and they would pull him back to pretend that he's like getting launched backwards and stuff.
Jeez.
Yeah, they kind of like abused the people they worked with. But I thought this was like just a fun little fact because it shows like almost a homebrew passion project level of commitment to this thing. And I think that really comes up with this other feature that actually was cut from the game. They talk about it in the documentary that they used a Game Boy camera to map your face. And then you could put that as a character in the game. So you could put yourself in Perfect Dark. But this never made the final cut because they realized with gamers, who knows what they're actually taking pictures of, putting them in the game.
It's not an online game. Somebody can take pictures, whatever. It's, it's all single player. It's not single player, but it's online.
Yeah, and now
offline.
It's like one of those things where it's like, even if it was in the game and it's up there now with online, like people are going to do terrible things no matter what.
Yeah.
You can't really stop
that. Definitely. But I just mean in the privacy of their own home, who cares if they do terrible things?
That is true. Speaking of faces, though, in video games here, we got some really cool facts with the faces used to make the characters in Perfect Dark. So a lot of them were just actors, like real actors, that they did just enough resemblance without having to pay them. So that artist, B. Jones, had a book of older British character actors that they used for reference a lot to make a character. For example, Carrington, the guy who runs the espionage agency, is based on one of those actors. But Joanna Dark, pretty much loosely based on Winona Ryder.
I can see it.
A lot of faces are rare employees. One notable fact is that B. Jones actually chose the president to be the Babylon 5 actor Richard Biggs, who has since passed away, but they did this to get like the first African-American president in a video game.
Nice.
Which I thought was pretty cool. There's other cool ones too. One of the best is that Shigeru Miyamoto is in the game.
Friend of the podcast.
Friend of the podcast. He's in the Pelagic 2 mission, which is like this underwater submarine thing. And he is wearing a pair of red overalls because Mario.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I thought this was great. Jonathan and Velvet, who are two other notable Carrington Institute agents that I kind of mentioned Velvet before as being the co-op one that you play with, is actually kind of like they had some more things about them that were kind of cut from the game, but not all of it was cut. So there's kind of this ambiguous thing about them being siblings to Joanna Dark, like Jonathan's her brother and Velvet's her sister, and that Jonathan was actually like the first Perfect Dark. But then Joanna beat his score, and then she became Perfect Dark. So there was going to be this like rivalry thing, but they ran out of space on the cartridge, which we're going to talk about at the end here. But Velvet was, interestingly enough, almost going to get their own third-person stealth game, a la Metal Gear Solid, because Metal Gear Solid was super popular at the time, and apparently it had meetings about it, and it just never happened.
That's cool. That would have been a neat idea.
Yeah, right? Getting a rare stealth Metal Gear Solid style game, that'd be really neat. One of the coolest things, though, done, as I talked about, was the bot personalities in multiplayer, because like the Venge Sim would like hunt you down if you killed it. And the multiplayer was really designed so that every weapon would like counter each other, which I thought was hilarious because as a kid, the laptop gun was just so OP that my brother and we didn't know what to do, but apparently there's a counter for it in the game to stop it. I'm guessing it would be the far sight, like because you could shoot through the wall and kill the gun before you can go in the room.
Yeah, I guess I do. You wouldn't even need to do that because you could just kill somebody else through the wall.
That's true. You don't even need to go in the room. But yeah, it's cool. The maps in this game are also really stellar. I just realized I didn't put a lot in about the maps in the game, but they had like Felicity, which is Facility from GoldenEye, but just renamed Felicity, was a good one. And yeah, they're really cool. The multiplayer mode in this game is just, it's one of those games that we probably should play as like a podcast group.
Yeah, well, it goes online on the 360 version, right?
It does. It does go online, but I think we'd all have to be on console, though. I don't think that's available on PC at all.
That is true.
So at the end of development, though, what they realized with Perfect Dark is their game was way too big. They were even using the debug memory on the dev consoles to make it work. So they were using like way too much memory. But this is right about the time that they heard about the expansion pack for the Nintendo 64 that would add memory. And this was huge because it made it so they could fit all the features in the game. And Ken Lobb, who I mentioned earlier, actually stated that you couldn't even play split screen co-op without the expansion pack. It just wouldn't work. So you had to have this expansion pack on there to get the full features. And when the game came out, it was kind of up for debate on whether these expansion pack add-on being included with the game was good or bad for the release. But they did sell over 2 million expansion packs in the life cycle of it. So
that's pretty good.
I think it's safe to say didn't really hurt the numbers that much. I can't remember if I got my expansion pack for my 64 from Perfect Dark or if I got it from the Donkey Kong 64 game, because they both came with it.
Yeah, I think Perfect Dark, there were versions sold without the expansion pack. I don't think Donkey Kong was ever sold without it, because it straight up wouldn't run without it.
Yeah, I think I got it. I know I got mine from a friend, and I think he got an extra one from Perfect Dark. So yeah, I got it from one of those two games.
Yeah, I got mine from Donkey Kong.
Nice. Oh, we could do an episode on the expansion pack. That's kind of a cool story.
Yeah.
The 64. So the legacy of Perfect Dark to me is that there's a lot of fun twists and turns in Perfect Dark, especially I've been talking about the plot now, and I think the game is worth playing, especially since the 360 version runs great and is on Game Pass. It's on Rare Replay too if you want to buy it on your own. But if you can get some friends together to play multiplayer, that's where it's at. I have so many fond memories of my brother and I and our childhood friends playing 4-player split screen against bots just for hours on end, and the competition was always who could kill the most bots. It was never angry killing each other, although we did that too. But it was still really fun. But before we go into Perfect Dark Zero, there is a fun little Perfect Dark Easter egg that I never even knew until I watched this documentary. Scattered throughout Perfect Dark's levels are small pieces of what look like cheddar cheese. Little holes in it. And those are actually the signature of an artist and graphics designer named Ross Berry. Now, it's Bury, Berry, burying something. B. Jones actually said where this came from and how it's not that exciting, but B. Jones noted that one of the images Ross Berry was working on at one point looked like a piece of cheese on the presidential plane level, and they just said, hey, that looks like a piece of cheese. So then Ross put a piece of cheese in every single level he worked on. So that's how you know if Ross Berry worked on that level, is you'll find a piece of cheese. I know one of them, it's in a toilet in one of them. I just thought that was a fun little Easter egg. But yeah, if you've never played Perfect Dark, the original, I can't recommend it enough. I think this is one of those really, and also just playing it, because I played it a lot this weekend, because I was I want to get back into it and get the feel of the whole thing. It plays so smooth still. It's got that Doom feel where you can just, your movement speed is fast. You don't have to sprint because you just move fast. And it does the little auto aim for you when you get close enough. So when you're on agent mode, you can just pew, 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 with move around. It's super fun. It feels like that flowy kind of combat that I like.
Yeah. Were you playing it on N64 or Xbox?
I decided to play it on Xbox. I didn't want to get my N64 out and set it all up because it
runs very smoothly on Xbox. I think on N64 it's kind of like GoldenEye, where it's
got some frame ratey stuff. And also every time I play a game on 64, I realize how bad that analog stick is.
Truly awful.
As much as I love it, I have the fond memories of it. I'm it's not good. But yeah, so I played it on 360. Plays like a dream on there. Super fun. It's got that weird thing. Oh, we didn't even talk about this. This gadgets in the game too. The Cam Spy is fun. It's a remote control camera that you can fly around the level. So
that's cool.
Oh yeah, it's got that same level of Bond gadgets to it too. There's so many things. I'm sure I'm missing something, and someone's going to email us and be like, "How did you not talk about this?" And I'll be like, "I'm so sorry." It's just so much going on with this game. Super fun.
Yeah.
But highly recommend it. But then you have Perfect Dark Zero, which I only played one mission of. That's where I'm at with that game.
Perfect Dark Zero is the Perfect Dark game I've spent more time with, because it was one of the first games I picked up when I got an Xbox 360, mostly because I got my Xbox 360 a couple of years after it came out. So by then, this game was dirt cheap. I probably still have my copy of it somewhere. I think I got the Steelbook version for $2 or something.
Nice.
Nobody wanted it. But you remember the hype leading up to the Xbox 360, back when console generations were only about 5 years apart. We were 4 years into that generation and the hype for the 360 was building up. Do you remember all that?
Oh yeah, it was real hyped. Real hype.
Yeah. Yeah, Microsoft was pretty successful with the original Xbox, and one of their strategies back in those days was to buy studios to help them make games, because they could make games. They had a gaming department, but in the 90s, Microsoft was kind of focused on PCs when it came to gaming. So by the time they were in the console game, they were just buying up all the studios to try to get good games made for their platforms, which is kind of what they're doing today now that they're making this push back into like PC gaming, or just a bigger push into gaming in general. They're just like trying to buy Activision right now, which who knows how well that's going to go for them if they're allowed to do that. But one of the studios they bought back in those days in the early 2000s was Rare, which is this studio that we've talked so much about. But remember, they were partially owned by Nintendo. Nintendo had 49% stake in Rare. They never actually owned Rare, but they owned enough to like basically own Rare, right? And they had made tons of games in the 90s. Like they revived the Super Nintendo, which we talked about in Console Wars in 1994 with the Donkey Kong Country when the N64 was being delayed. So these guys making good games. They made Perfect Dark, they made GoldenEye. So of course, Microsoft bought them. And everyone at Rare was kind of surprised that Nintendo didn't just buy them out when they had the chance. But I guess Nintendo didn't see them as valuable as they thought they were. Their games sold very well on the Super Nintendo, but I guess by the end of the N64 era, they were kind of fallen off a little bit. They weren't they weren't guaranteed hits every single time, or they weren't selling as well as people thought they would. They were well-received games. But Microsoft got there, and I think they outbid Activision as well, and they bought Rare for $375 million. And so in 2002, Rare was no longer in the business of making games for Nintendo consoles, except for Star Fox Adventures, which they were still allowed to release on the GameCube. I don't know if they were technically owned by Microsoft when that game came out, but that was the last game they put out on the GameCube. So Perfect Dark Zero fits into this because it originally started life as a sequel to Perfect Dark to be released on the GameCube. Nintendo had showed it off at Space World in 2000, I think, and they just kind of showed off like a really high-res version of Joanna Dark, because they're like, look at the GameCube, and it was sort of a hint that like, oh yeah, we're going to make another Perfect Dark game, which everybody knew was going to happen because the first Perfect Dark was so well received. They were like, of course they're going to make a sequel for it on GameCube, and it's going to have great graphics. But when Rare became a Microsoft studio, all that work transferred from the GameCube to the original Xbox, because most of Rare's titles in those days were owned by them, which was pretty smart on their part to make sure they still had the rights to characters like Joanna Dark. They also kept Conker, they kept Banjo. Now, what they went on to do with all those characters is questionable at best, but they still retain the rights to basically everything except Donkey Kong and Star Fox, because those are obviously Nintendo characters.
Man, what are we going to get? A AAA Conker game?
Oh, man, I would love to see a sequel to Conker's Bad Fur Day. The Live and Reloaded remake on Xbox is one of the best remakes of any game, and I highly recommend playing it if toilet humor is your thing. I never played it,
so I mean, you know me, big into toilet humor.
Oh, you're going to love it. You should play it. It's on Rare Replay.
Oh, I might do that. I think I'm going to pick that up later this week.
The N64 version and the Live and Reloaded version, I think, are both part of Rare Replay. So that's pretty cool.
It is cool.
So Rare's first chance to prove that they were still a juggernaut developer, even under Microsoft's umbrella, was the release of Perfect Dark Zero in 2005, which was a prequel to the original Perfect Dark. You want to get into the grime facts, Mike?
Oh, I love me some grime facts.
So, developed by Rare, published by Microsoft, I think. Release date, it came out on November 22nd, 2005. That's important because it was a launch title for the Xbox 360, which I think plays a heavy, heavy part in this game's story, the meta story, not the story in the game. I mean the story of the game, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
Came out on Xbox 360, and you can also play it on Xbox One and Series. It plays on basically, whatever. It's part of Rare Replay, so it's all backward compatible. It sold over 1 million copies according to sources, but there isn't really a definitive number out there anywhere. It's a first-person shooter. It takes about 7.5 hours to beat the campaign, or 20 hours if you're a completionist. You want to go back and get all the stuff. Its Metacritic score, though, Mike, I want you to take a guess. I don't know if you looked ahead or not. I want you to take a guess at what you think the Metacritic score was.
Now, you have this completely blacked out, so I can't see it. And I haven't looked at this document beforehand. So I am going to shot in the dark say it got 64 out of 100.
That is incorrect, sir. It got an 81.
Whoa, so it was good. It was, I mean, even a 64 isn't technically bad, but it's like, that's not bad at all.
This game gets a bad rap. I mean, it is not remembered very fondly, and I'll get into the reasons why I think that is, and why I think the Metacritic score is as high as it is, because it did get good reviews kind of across the board. Like, there were very few review sites that like gave it like the 5s and 6s that we sort of would assume it is today. It was a lot of 9s, 8s and 9s out of 10, and 4 out of 5. So, that's kind of interesting, and I'll talk about why I think that is in a little bit. But
we got to talk about the gameplay of it, because I did play the first mission of this, and I have some complaints.
Yeah, okay. I will be interested to hear those.
Okay.
So Perfect Dark Zero, like I said, was a launch title for the Xbox 360, so it came out alongside games like Amped 3, Call of Duty 2, and another Rare game that started life on the GameCube. That's Cameo, Elements of Power, which is probably a game we should eventually do.
We do need to talk about that.
If we didn't already talk about it when we talked about Rare.
I think you briefly mentioned it, but we even said then we need to talk about this game in some more detail and play it ourselves here. Yeah, okay.
So Perfect Dark Zero was following up on what I consider to be the best first-person shooter on the N64. That's a pretty tall order. Not that there were that many first-person shooters on the N64, and most of them weren't very good anyway, so that's not exactly a high bar, but I do think it's the best FPS on the N64. Rare had basically invented the console FPS with GoldenEye, or at least the first FPS that like wasn't actually awful, right? They refined it then with Perfect Dark, and now they were tasked with putting another one on for the Xbox 360 for launch. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the stakes around a game like this. I think the context of when this game came out is extremely important. So remember, in 2005, at launch for the Xbox 360, there was no Halo game. Halo 2 came out a year before in 2004 and was just ripping it up on Xbox Live. Everybody loved Halo 2. Halo 3 was still 2 years away. And in those days, Halo was like the biggest thing Xbox had going for it. So not having a Halo title at launch, I think was a really, really big deal. And there was a lot of eyes on Microsoft to have something to fill that void for folks who bought an Xbox 360. So basically any first-person shooter that came out before Halo 3 on the Xbox 360 was being compared to Halo 3 already, basically. And that game didn't exist yet, so it was being compared to a mythical game that wasn't out yet.
That sounds like this is going to go great.
Yeah. So there was quite a power vacuum to fill there. And I think if there were a game that could do it right, it kind of had a shot at being the next Halo, because if it filled that void for people, then it could take off on its own. And maybe they were hoping Perfect Dark would be that. We got to talk about the competition in the FPS arena on the Xbox 360. There were only 2 other games at launch, Call of Duty 2 and Quake 4. Both of those games came out a couple months earlier in October, so they were kind of known. They were already out on PC. People knew what they were about. They weren't exclusive to the Xbox 360, so they didn't have that like, oh, is this Microsoft's new Halo kind of thing going about them. And Call of Duty is so different from Halo anyway. It's not really in competition. Quake 4 was kind of meh. I mean, it was fine as a game, but it wasn't like, didn't blow anybody's socks off. So Perfect Dark was the only first-person shooter that was exclusive to the 360 at launch. So it carried that heavy burden of being Halo, of needing to fill that Halo void for Xbox 360 owners. I think that's really important when we get to how this game was received, which we will get to in a little bit. But let's talk about gameplay.
I think you are spot on that this is the most important context of it all for this game. Yeah.
So there's some good stuff here in the gameplay. It's a first-person shooter, just like the original game, set in the far-off future of 2020, 3 years before the first game. It's got a younger, hipper Joanna Dark going around the world doing spy stuff. It's set in 2020, but boy, you could tell this game was made in the mid-2000s because she's got her blonde highlights in her fire engine red hair, low-rise pants, it's like generic cyberpunk cityscapes. The music, oh man, this game, despite taking place in the air quotes future, because we're now past that future, really feels like a time capsule for the mid-2000s. And it does so from an aesthetic point of view also, but also from a gameplay. Because in those days, FPSs hadn't quite figured out regenerating health yet. They hadn't Like most games these days, it's regenerating health in FPS is kind of the standard. And if you choose not to do that, you do so deliberately. But in those days, regenerating health was still kind of this new thing that Halo had popularized, and Halo 2 was like, they doubled down on it. And so Call of Duty 2 had fully embraced it by now. But we were still in this kind of transitionary period, and not every FPS did that. And Perfect Dark did this like half and half thing, where your health would regenerate, but only to a point. So as you took damage, your maximum health would go down a little slower than your current health. And then if you didn't take damage for a while, you would regenerate up to your maximum health point. So you were rewarded for getting out of the line of fire from enemies, but you were also trying to avoid getting hit at all in the first place because it would make your maximum health go down. The game also had a cover system, pre-Gears of War, so it's a little janky, but it is one of the earliest games to have a cover system, and I think it deserves some points for that. That's kind of a gameplay innovation. I'm not going to come out here and say it was the first game to ever have a cover system, because I don't think that's true, but cover systems were still pretty new and novel in those days, and for Perfect Dark to have it was a little bit innovative, I think. So, yeah, I want to hear what you think about the gameplay, though, Mike.
You just mentioned my two gripes.
Oh.
my first gripe, I didn't realize the maximum health. I'm like, why is my health not regenerating all the way, is what I said to myself while I was playing this video game. So now I know what was going on. But that cover system, oof.
It's bad.
It's bad because it's hard to recognize what you can go into cover on. And also, it's a very small point of the cover. You know how like now we have modern cover systems. You see a wall, you just walk out to it, hit A. There's no distinct place you have to be on said wall. You'll just snap in. That is not the case with Perfect Dark Zero. And I was dying and losing this max health because I was frantically pressing A by a wall, thinking I can cover on it. And it turns out I can't cover on that wall in particular, but I can cover on the one across from it.
Just not that one.
Yeah, and it was driving me insane. That's what it really was. I died so many times in the first mission trying to figure out the cover system.
Yeah, it's not what you would call reliable.
No, I mean, it did feel good, though. Like, it felt very much like Perfect Dark, the first Perfect Dark. Okay. It just had these little things to it where I was like, oh, they're trying some new things and it's not landing, and it's a gripe of mine, but it's not going to make me not want to play the game anymore. Sure. I want to finish this game. I want to know the pre-story of Joanna Dark.
Well, I believe in your ability to finish the game. There are 14 levels, which is a little bit fewer, it seems, than if you count the multiple part levels in the first one. You said there were 17, I think. So there are 14 levels in Perfect Dark Zero. You go around blasting bad guys. They basically just Bruce Lee bad guy. You run in one at a time, kind of like the original on N64. They're not very smart. They just sort of take a bunch of damage. They take a lot of hits to die. This is not like a 1 or 2 shot kill like it is in Call of Duty. This is like fill an enemy with an entire magazine and then reload, and then maybe they'll be halfway dead.
Time to kill is very long in this video game.
Yeah, but it feels similar to the N64 game in that sense. I think it's the gameplay and the story are relatively unremarkable, except for the things I already talked about for the single player. But the graphics, though, were actually pretty good technically. So you can tell there was like more emphasis placed on like technically looking good, like using the capabilities of the Xbox 360, because this game sort of has that like mid 2000s next gen like shine on it. Like I don't know how to describe it other than like everything looks like it's just sort of covered in a layer of oil that like reflects light.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, though. That is that shine, the mid 2000s shine is there. I
think that's there because they couldn't do that in previous generations, but this was something that the newer generation games and higher fidelity games on like the GameCube and Xbox would do, because like this sort of simulated light reflection was like a I don't want to say it was actually technically impressive, but I think it gave the impression that it was technically impressive, because reflections are like a thing that are technically impressive. So it was like, oh, if we just sort of fake reflections on everything, it'll look better, which is not true. And I'm glad. I mean, that still happens today where things kind of look like they're plastic.
Yeah. And sometimes you want that, like the Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening.
Yeah, it worked really well in that game because they leaned into it.
But yeah, this one definitely has that. Why is everything so glossy?
Yeah, exactly. And everything's like kind of motion blurred, but they hadn't quite figured out motion blur. They were just like, just throw it on everything because it makes it look more realistic. And while it was cool and technically impressive, like going back to it now, it's like, oh, what were they doing here? Turn that off if you can.
I usually turn motion blur off on like every game I play anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a decent showcase of what the Xbox 360 and like what next gen games are going to look like at the time, even if it was like uninspired because it wasn't very stylized. It definitely suffers from being like a launch title that's like, you need to show what the 360 can do. Like if you buy an Xbox 360 and you play a game on it that looks like it could have been on the original Xbox, you're going to feel like, why did I buy a 360? So you need, like Microsoft needed to put out games that showed off the power of the Xbox 360, and players wanted those too. They wanted their new shiny game on the Xbox 360, literally and figuratively.
I feel like I've talked about this at length before, like multiple times, but there was these demo discs they would give out at this time still, and one of them was a DVD on Oblivion, the new Elder Scrolls game on 360, and it was all about this shine and how shiny and everything, and the light and how everything looked so great, and it still had that kind of like glossy look. Like you would go into those elven ruins in Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and you're like, why is all this gray stone so shiny everywhere?
They're like throwing water on it just to give you that shine. Yeah.
Is just everything in here wet? What is happening? Why is it like that?
Yeah. It's just that was what they did in those days. And I'm sure we'll look back on games from today and we'll go, oh yeah, it has that 2020s look, you know?
Yeah.
Like probably early ray traced games are all going to sort of look a certain way in like 10 years. And we're going to be like, oh yeah, that was one of those early ray traced games. Yeah.
Gross.
Yeah. That's probably what we're going to look back on it. So every generation has that. But I want to talk a little bit about the multiplayer because I think that was the biggest burden that this game had to carry for Halo. Because Halo 2 was a sci-fi first-person shooter Xbox exclusive game. It was, like I said, tearing it up on Xbox Live. It was the highest played game on Xbox Live, I think, until Gears of War came out on the 360, which was a year after the 360 came out. You still couldn't beat Halo 2 online. So the hopes were pretty high for Perfect Dark Zero that it would be as good as Halo 2 and be that game. Because like I said, when you buy a new console and you buy a new game for that console, you want that to be your game. And I think the multiplayer was fun. It had bots like the original. It was very customizable, and it played online. But it just wasn't quite as robust or as well built as Halo 2's was. And this is the real kicker here, Halo 2 played in backwards compatibility on the 360 from launch day on 360 if you had a 360 with a hard drive in it. So most people just stuck to that once they realized that like this crop of games that came out at launch didn't have multiplayer that was better than Halo 2. They just pop their old Halo 2 disc back in and just keep playing away on their 360 instead of on their original Xbox. So
yeah, why not? I mean, if you know it's got that polish, you
yeah,
can play that game forever.
Yep, I do think there might be a different story here if the 360 wasn't backward compatible with if you couldn't play Halo 2 on your 360. I think more people would have like forced themselves to play games like Perfect Dark online, because it was like you don't want to buy a 360 and then just go back to playing your old Xbox, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So that's
but that might have been a big negative against Microsoft.
Oh yeah, it would have been a positive for Perfect Dark. I don't think it would have been a good idea in general to not have backward compatibility. But it might have made Perfect Dark be a little bit more fondly remembered.
For sure.
So yeah, we can move on to talking about the reception here because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Despite the Metacritic score saying the game is decent, the people didn't really like it. It didn't really excel at anything. The gameplay was fine. It had its issues like you were talking about. It feels a little unresponsive. The graphics were great. The art was fine. But like I said earlier, more of a tech demo than it was actually like had good art. The voice acting is really bad. I'm not kidding. It's truly, truly awful. Like go look up some videos, like YouTube videos of the voice acting in this game. They're terrible. The multiplayer was, again, fine. It was an evolution of what Rare had done in GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, but it just wasn't Halo. Halo was so far ahead of its time that games were still trying to catch up. That's why Halo 2 was number one on Xbox Live until Gears came out, basically until Halo 3 came out. Perfect Dark did support up to 32 players, which was a lot at the time. That was another like selling point of the Xbox 360 that they kept saying. They were like, oh yeah, when this new Xbox comes out, we're going to be able to do things like have great graphics and sound, and you'll be able to have so many more players in your online games. And back in those days, we kind of thought more players would just sort of be better. I think we've learned today that more players is not necessarily better. Like, you don't just take a game, drop 100 people into it, and it's just immediately better. You have to design a game for that. But so I don't think a 32-player game in Perfect Dark was very fun. It could do up to 50 when they were in development, but then they were like, 360 can't handle this. So they dropped it down to 32 players, which is still high even by today's standards. Like I said, because you got to design for games that have 32 people in them. And I think it's more fun and easier to design for games that have many fewer people, if you ask me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, 32. I think about Battlefield, where it's like 64. That's a lot of players.
Yeah.
Which is why sometimes Battlefield can feel like a running simulator if you're in a weird
Yeah.
map where you got to get somewhere.
Yeah, and Battlefield had the big maps to sort of like design for that. And we can argue all day whether or not a 64-player game of Battlefield is better than a 32-player game, but they did design for that, right? And I don't know if they designed for that in Perfect Dark Zero. I don't know if the maps could really hold
or had vehicles.
People. Yeah,
somewhere to get people faster. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So there were a lot of game modes in multiplayer, which was cool, but again, we're in a quantity over quality situation here. None of them are particularly good. And with the rest of the game being mediocre at best compared to Halo, it just never really picked up traction. I do think there's a little bit of a bright spot in the music. Some reviewers will tell you the music's not good, and that the original had a better soundtrack, which might be true, but this one did have a couple of licensed tracks that I don't mind. I like the track Limelight that plays in the nightclub. There's also a song called Glitter Girl that's in it, and this was not at the beginning of like licensing songs for games, but it was sort of the beginning of games getting like a song made for the game that like some games would do, and Perfect Dark chose to do that. But Glitter Girl, I enjoyed it, but it does kind of sound like one of those like air quotes futuristic songs that just sounds like music from the mid 2000s, but with like computer glitches in it. Because in the future that's how we make music, is with computer glitches, which is not entirely untrue.
Totally.
So I don't know. I just thought that was worth talking about because it seems like they put a little extra care into it, made some deliberate decisions, even if those decisions weren't always good. I appreciate, making a choice, right?
I'm about to listen to the music when we get done with this episode. So yeah. I think it was worth it. Totally.
Yeah. So what happened here? Why was Perfect Dark Zero just not very good? And I think it comes down to a couple of things. And I'm just going to sort of summarize what I said before. But the game itself is only mediocre. And in a sea of games that were better, like there were better games at launch. The 360 had 18 launch titles, I think, in North America. So there was a lot of choice, even if nothing quite filled that Halo void. It also had some technical issues. Started life as a GameCube game. Then when Rare got bought by Microsoft, it moved to the original Xbox. And then once it was taking a little bit too long to make for the original Xbox, they moved it again so that it would be a 360 launch title, and they had to start over a bunch of times. So I just think it's hard to make a good game in the midst of having like you're not only in transition of ownership and management, but also tech transitions between GameCube and Xbox 360. That's a lot. And I think the game probably suffered for it because they had to focus on all of these transitions rather than be putting time and effort into making sure the game is good. The second thing that this game suffered from is high expectations. It was hyped and hoped as the Xbox 360's Halo title. It was the follow-up title to a beloved first-person shooter on the N64, which was so good. And so players were going to buy this game knowing that it was a Perfect Dark game, which had carried weight, and knowing that, or hoping that it would sort of fill the Halo void for them for a couple more years while they're waiting for Halo 3. And since you're wanting to when you get a new console, you want to play those new games on the console. So I think a lot of people bought the game for that reason, but ultimately it was not great. People just stuck to Halo 2. So I think that's kind of it. I think, like I said, I think it would be remembered a little more fondly today if backward compatibility was not a thing on the 360, because people would have sort of forced themselves to play it and found ways to love it. And I think that brings me to my final point, which is why this game scored so highly, even though it's not remembered very fondly. I think reviewers wanted it to be good. I think everyone was so hyped on a new console at the time. And you got to remember, reviewers are players, like games. They get excited for games. They want them to be good, right? At least in those days they did. And the game is fun, especially if you're sort of forcing yourself to play it for the review. you could have been playing something else. So most people did. So now it's lost in time. That was the last Perfect Dark game that ever came out. Maybe
That's
the
true.
quadruple A Perfect Dark game will redeem them. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like we are calling this a forgotten game because until that game is published and put in a store or on the online store or something, this is a forgotten game because we've seen bigger games get canceled that never
That's
come
true.
out. So that is why this is a forgotten game. And we know so little about this new Perfect Dark game. The only thing I know is when I was Googling How Long to Beat, not Googling, but on How Long to Beat, searching for the first Perfect Dark game, I accidentally pulled up the quadruple A one, which apparently has a release date of 2024. So
Okay.
for now, it is forgotten.
Oh.
So sad.
So that's Perfect Dark though. What you been playing, Mike?
Ooh, well, I've been playing a lot of Perfect Dark, and I played Perfect Dark Zero, as I said. But the new game I picked up was High on Life, that new game, that new first-person shooter game.
Oh yeah,
From
how's that?
Justin Roiland. I'm enjoying it so far. It's pretty fun. It's definitely one of those situations where I played it on my Xbox One, and it's hard to play because it's just an old console.
Yeah.
And then I switched it to my PC, and it runs like a dream, and it's like so easy to shoot with a mouse and keyboard compared to that.
Love it.
Yeah, so I mean, the big thing is I got new internet, and I told Tyler's probably so tired of hearing about this, but I can tell the listeners, and it's changing my life. I was living at 40 megabits per second, and now I'm at 940, and
Sheesh.
oh my gosh, I'm just downloading things so quickly now. Like if I want to play a game, like I was like, oh, I should try High on Life on my PC. It was like 20 minutes, and then I was playing. That's how fast it was to download, and I'm like,
Incredible.
yeah, that used to be an overnight deal for me. So. Yeah, I like High on Life a lot. I'm enjoying it. It's very much a linear first-person shooter, which is kind of just what I want right now. I just don't want to think. I just want to kind of shoot these guns. And I've seen critiques of it being like the gun play is kind of bland, and I can see that. And it gets better as you unlock things with your gun aliens, your Gatlians is what they're called.
You Gatlians.
Yeah, but it's pretty cool. I like it. What have you been playing this week?
Well, I just wrapped up a bunch of stuff at work finally, and I'm going into vacation mode for a little while, and so I haven't played much this past week, but I'm hoping to play a lot more in the coming week. I guess I'm leaving to go back home to Washington for a week, so I may not play as many games then. But I've been playing Gotham Knights, really going hard on that game, and I think I'm almost done with it. I'm on Chapter 6 of 7. And they're not super long. I'm doing some of the side stuff, like, they basically every time you complete something, like 8 more things pop on the map because it's an open world game, and people just think that more content is better. Some of it's fun, some of it's not. I'm just not doing the non-fun stuff, just doing all the stuff that I think is fun that I want to do. And I'm enjoying it. I like the story. I'm just playing it as Batgirl. I haven't played as any of the other characters still. But yeah, that's kind of it though, because like I said, I've been really crushed at work this past week, but I'm hoping that is, well, I know it has all subsided now, and so I'm hoping to head into vacation mode, play a lot more games.
Yeah, Friday's my go into vacation mode, and I am 100% going to pick up Pokemon again. That is the plan. Play more
right.
Pokemon. Yeah. With this, too, we should mention, next week is the Christmas holiday for us, too, and we will both be traveling, so there will be a remastered episode coming out next week. So we'll let everyone know now. But for the new year, I feel like we should do a little maybe preview right now to tell people what's going on.
Okay.
I am pretty excited. I got a book that is out of print that is very rare, called The History of Nintendo, 1889 to 1980, from playing cards to Game & Watch. And I am really going to try to hit this as kind of a independent project for this podcast in a way, because it's going to take me a while to get through it. And so the episodes will come out as they go. But I was really wondering, Nintendo in World War II, what's going on? All this stuff. And I think this book has the answers. And since I don't expect anyone to pick up this book because it's kind of expensive, I just want to let people know that's kind of what's going to be on the docket at the beginning of the year for us. But we also will do our normal book club, too, of a book that's way more accessible as well, because this book is just not that accessible. I don't even know if there's a PDF of it anywhere for people to read.
Dang.
So, yeah. First time I ever bought a book that was like over $100 though. And I'm like,
Whew.
man,
That's an expensive book.
it is, but I feel like it's worth it because it's something that I'm really interested in is knowing about like the early history of Nintendo, which I know is not even technically video games, but I want to know. And you know what? It's our podcast, so we can do whatever we want. So there we
And
go.
knowledge is priceless.
That's right. That's right, Tyler. So with that, hope you all have a happy holidays. If you celebrate the holidays, you can send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com. We're not doing emails this week because this episode's kind of long. You can join our Discord through our email or through the pinned tweet on my Twitter profile at Mecoletta, MECOLETTA. Tyler's on Twitter too, at SneakerElf with an ELPH. And with that, do you want to say bye to everybody, Tyler?
Goodbye, everybody.